there's the going back to like, like weird vague stuff like with the poetry and stuff. Nigel Shoehorn. I was trying to make kind of a lot of different parallels to Vladimir Nabokov's his Pale Fire, which is one of the more necessarily kind of English ones that he wrote, because he was a Russian born, obviously author, and he had a lot of very interesting. I think I did a review of it maybe last year, and I think the main thing with it was with Pale Fire was the fact that it was a take on literary criticism and how kind of far, not maybe far gone, but definitely how diluted and how far cry from what it should be doing, which is basically just offering some, and maybe even on its own terms, like even just the base kind of preliminary requirements of, or requisites of literary criticism. And I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of literary criticism. That's meta enough for you, but maybe even that is like ineffectual to an extent, or effect. But I think like to an extent, like the like Nabokov is going off on this through the eyes of this Zembla guy, and he's I think like he's like talking endlessly about John Shade, the man who wrote the poet, in question. He's like he's a academic kind of scholar of poetry, or John Shade is too, or whatever. He's like he's a kind of he's both a kind of student of poetry and also a poet himself. So that's, and everything that the guy writes about him, this Zembla guy, details lost, everything is subjective and completely erroneous. Basically, he's like lies about where he's come from. He's like, I come from this kingdom of like this kingdom that doesn't exist, and these people, it's just really funny. And yeah, it's just, I think it's just a take on like how ridiculous like literary criticism can be, like how off kilter it can get. Like it's just like you aren't actually adding or detracting anything. You're not edifying the piece itself. You're not complimenting it even. All you are doing is adding your own kind of 2 cents, which is like a subjective kind of thing. And I think like maybe Nabokov is seeing that, how a lot of people writing about acting kind of like with their kind of head in the air and kind of to like cocky snobberies basically, bores. They actually don't really do much anything of themselves. Like there's a lot of, like, I think with like the character Zembla, he's like very much an admirer of Shade. Yes, he's not like an evil person per se, but he is definitely very unhealthy with his fixation on like like trying to figure out like the, what was it called, like, oh yeah, the Pale Fire poem, the titular Pale Fire, like it's like a 999 line like elegiac poem, and it's like, so he just goes on and on and on, just like being like, oh, this, it was actually because John Shade's, the poet's daughter actually passed away, and he's like going on with all these different things, like that's why he's doing this. This is you see the reason why. Like there'll be like one line, this I found hilarious. There'll be like one tiny line, like she went to bed. I'm not saying this didn't actually happen, but he'll be like, this is what he actually means by this, is like she went to bed. That actually means like they don't really just like wax poetic on, or philosophical or whatever on it for like pages, and that's yeah. And I didn't get it at first until I kind of took some time to kind of deconstruct what was going on. But yeah, I just wanted to use it a little bit like that without being too derivative, and it probably is, but because there's another character that goes on there and starts saying like, Nigel Shoehorn, this is his leave taking of Europe, his leave taking of England, Cheshire, whatever, England, and he's like going on, like, and this is the real reason why he is doing this, or did that, or said this, and like I kind of want to do a little play on that kind of mentality, I guess. But yeah, it's like, I think because there's a center of kind of academia that's like can get a little bit closed-minded, oddly enough, where they're not really, they're so up in their ivory tower. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but yeah, they're so high up in that tower that they don't actually they kind of infractiously kind of go about and just like there are people that do that. There are there are, which is why I think like anything from humanities, where part of me was actually kind of hesitant to actually enter this kind of arena, is because so many of them kind of fit the bill of the pipe smoking kind of, oh yes, like kind of jacket collar, but moth-eaten kind of kind of plaid jackets and all that, and like the turtlenecks. And I don't want to totally throw them to the wolves, but there is, I think they're just a little bit. I think there's something a little bit wrong with this idea that. I think there's like a pretty interesting article I read about Wittgenstein, and it was like from the point of view of somebody who actually did study philosophy, I think, and he was saying that one of his, no joke, like this, I think he said that one of his teachers, professors, rather, had a personal assistant literally go and like deliver certain things for him. Like you'd be like, could you go get this? And could you go get that? And I think that's maybe a symptom of, maybe it was Oxford, I think he said, like I think. So maybe that's not understandable. But it's like, I think that's might be a thing. Maybe it's just I'm from the outside looking into this stuff. It's a Stain song that's really annoying. But yeah, there's maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe they're not like this at all. But like I think there's some people actually embody the stereotype of just too smart for your own good, too educated for your own good, that you don't even actually know about the outside world, and you don't know. That's why I think it's important too to this idea of like rough play to an extent within reason. This idea of like engaging with others, and like me, I'm saying this as somebody who is homeschooled, so I'm one to talk. But I think like I do think it's important to actually kind of engage and like find others and like find a circle of people. Who aren't immediately in that kind of intellectual realm, I guess, or so maybe a lot of the people too, I think maybe it's the fact that maybe I grew up with people that were kind of more working class, I guess, and more kind of, who had to kind of pull themselves by the bootstraps. I mean, my dad was pretty educated, he read Dostoevsky, he read, he was Catholic who also, which is like kind of interesting because Dostoevsky was like, so, markedly anti-Catholic, I believe, but I could be wrong. But yeah, he was, my dad too, like he was, he was educated, his dad too. I've been kind of trying to imbue that too a little bit into my story about my own family, but also autobiographical, but also through kind of a scanner, kind of weird skewered scanner, I guess, through a different kind of lens, like looking at it as if part of it is real, like actual recounting of what happened. Like my grandmother, for example, did marry, like she was this daughter of an ambassador, one of the ambassadors, many ambassadors to Greece, and her name was, I think, Cleopatra Triphinidilis, I think. Excuse me, I know it sounds probably really bad, really stupid of me not to remember my grandmother's name, but like at the same time it is a pretty confusing Greek name. As we know, like a lot of Greek names can have like long oikois or oikolouis or something oblus or something like that. You get like that. Whereas with Italian, you get a lot of inis, I guess. You get a lot of ricci and nisi and hidi or lidis, and but yeah, or a lot of Marias and stuff like that. But yeah, there's she was I just thought that was interesting because there was just the things that could have happened. Like she could have married this guy that was a kind of I think he was an English writer who was living in Brazil, and no, he was Brazilian. He was like writing, and he could have actually he wrote all these love letters to my grandmother, and then it turned out that she rejected him, like kind of kindly though. She had a class, and she was ended up going with my granddad, who's who was this Scottish guy who was also kind of an erudite kind of scholar of Sanskrit too. That was that was his brother. No, he was I think a he was a medicine doctor. So both of them were actually doctors at some point. I think both of them went to medical school. My granddad, like from Scotland, Bruff. That's actually comes from, if you look up, there's actually a Bruff castle. And it is, for the longest time when I was younger, a kid, when my dad would tell us about this, and he was like, oh, well, we actually have a castle, And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, this entire, I was expecting this regal, mammoth, like, Colossus castle with, like, towers, like, jutting up to the sky, and basically, I looked at the pictures, and I can remember seeing, like, all the kind of remnants of stone and how battered it was. Like, it was made in, like, the 11th century, I think, maybe 12th. And, yeah, that's more than enough time, especially, like, when I guess through Norman conquest. I'm not too good at history, but, like, I guess, like, in, like, all the Anglo-Saxon kind of tribal kind of kingdom, feudalistic mentality, I guess, was still around, and they didn't really maintain it good. And on top of that, there was also a feast in the castle, too, that they held in, like, the 1500s, I think, and they basically burned the place, like, almost charred the whole thing down. And I think that's what kind of made the castle look kind of so pitiable, I guess, in comparison to all the other ones dotted across. I'm sure there's hundreds across England. I know that castles to England is what cathedrals are to Paris, France. So you get, like, a lot of, not just in Paris, but all throughout France, just, like, tons of cathedrals. Tons of Notre Dames, Our Lady, Our Mother, like, they're very, lots of, anyway, but that's a massive diversion there. Let me check to see if we're still recording. Okay. Another thing I guess it's worth mentioning, even though this is like halfway through the video. There was I did do one attempt at this with, but I stupidly enough, I didn't check to see if my battery pack was, on the camcorder was, camera, which is not the 1990s anymore, was charged, and I thought it was, and I ended up running dry in the middle, and like I basically died, like probably not more than 20 minutes into the whole thing, fiasco, and then I ended up talking for like an hour straight to the camera, and then I was like, that should be good enough, right? And then I check and it's not recording, and I'm like, ah. So this is basically a reconstruction of trying to piece together all the stuff that I'm talking about, that I talked to you about in that video, which is really hard because that too was also a few weeks ago. So anyway, but yeah, there's another character of Ewell. Ewell Armistead was the name I finally came. Who's like a Flannery O'Connor, kind of Southern Gothic, definitely. Probably a little bit too suspiciously much like Flannery O'Connor, or William Faulkner too. But he is essentially what I'm trying to do is rewrite the gospel in a biblical fashion, like whether it's the four gospels, told through the varying lenses of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, even Thomas too. I think the Gnostic kind of gospels that were non-canonical, I guess, weren't deemed, truthful enough, I guess, in a sense, by various, church, I guess, bishops and stuff in like the very, very early century. But regardless of that, biblical matters aside, I did want to kind of reconstruct an entire gospel kind of thing, but through the lens and retold through this Southern Gothic kind of very uneducated, quite brash, average kind of man by the name of Ewell, who is just like Jesus Christ, aged about 30 to 31, and ends up going on a quest after he, and I wanted to make a few differences, though, like the differences being that, well, I guess there are maybe not so many differences, but, obviously he's going in totally different directions of Christ. Like, Christ is, like, talks about redemption, like, the, some, or keeping up with the old law too. Like he talked about that too, and like kind of the subsistence of the old law, but also like hope and redemption, and the beatitudes. Like blessed are the faithful, the meek, and the the poor, the abject, the poverty, like those. The poor will always be among us, like very much things that I have nothing against. Really, I grew up with that in my kind of the bosom of everything I know is within Christian, evangelical Christian. So that's kind of what I grew up in, with some kind of varying friends of friends that were pretty like more fundamentalist and very like more radicalized, and like go out in the streets with uh, bullhorns and shout the truth and the good word, and basically just be kind of obnoxious. But anyway, the I don't want to make it seem like I have bile against people who are Christians, but it's more like from a point of view of somebody who is just trying to figure stuff out and is trying to like even for Flannery O'Connor, or Dostoevsky, who were both Christians or Catholics, O'Connor being a Catholic, and maybe more so like a little bit Cormac McCarthy too, with his certain characters that were kind of had a little bit of a savant kind of thing, like in Child of God I recently read. It was just like really just something else. I gotta review that sometime, but yeah, Yule, the character, I wanted to make him charming in a sense. Like he has a weird kind of southern charm, and he's from meeker means, but not like there's a point early in the novel where in his sermon's point of view, the manifesto, the gospel according to Yule, which I'd like to I'm probably going to actually get that edited by itself and like basically send it off as a separate thing, like a separate kind of book, because I think that is enough to be a book, kind of like a maybe 6 or 7 hour read, I guess. But I also want to let it kind of foment a little bit more. Like there's some things with Yule about that I gotta fix. I gotta go through it all, because it's in a certain dialect, like using y'all, like even his name sounds like y'all, you all, like a lot of different kind of apostrophes, kind of scattered little like fractured words too, like a lot of different vernaculars is a big thing, like dialect and parlance of the place too. Like Louisiana, he's born into this little rural town, and he's like right away into kind of like a very chaotic, turbulent family that's like a broken family basically. His mother is the only one who pretty much looks after him, and I think, but she ends up dying when he's quite young too, so that kind of haunts him in a way, but he doesn't show it definitely. There's a lot of things that he resigns in showing, like he's like, my name's Ewell Guston Armistead, like I was born in so-and-so Louisiana, or at least that's what I'm told. Kind of like a bit like the Nick Cave in the Bad Seed song, the Mercy Seat, where he's like, I think like, I can't remember the other lyrics, but like, the mercy seat is riding, my head is burning, yeah, great song. But yeah, he also wrote a Southern Gothic book too, I have, called The Ass Saw the Angel, I believe. Yeah, pretty good. Great, maybe a little bit kind of a pastiche of Flannery O'Connor too, but I guess like for what it was, like definitely was really heavy hitting in a lot of ways, and it's definitely a style though. It's like hard to get that kind of speak, that lingo, So I'm trying to, and when Ewell, when he like his mother goes through a series of boyfriends and prospective husbands, and one of them was he remembers kindly as being the only one who would actually have anything nice to say. And then he also worked at a sugar packing factory, and he remembers all the days he would come back home, and then all of us as little kids, like him and his couple of little brothers, would lick the sweet off of him. But then it kind of breaks too. There's like, I'm not sure how many brothers or sisters he should have, but I think like the main thing is like he's kind of a lone wolf too, so I don't think he really mentions or invokes like a lot of his siblings very much. Maybe they went off and possibly died, but like there's a lot omitted, I think, from the story. And now like I said, because he narrates it, so he's basically says that, like, I'm, all my life he didn't really do anything that interesting. Like, he was questioning people in school. Like, he stood up, in a similar way that Jesus did to Pharisees. Like, he stood up, or to the teachers in the synagogue. Stands up to certain preachers in the church on out in maybe Muscle Shoals. Like, no, that's actually Alabama, but either way. But he stands up to all these kind of Pentecostal kind of very parish local churches that are focused on the spectacle of belief and way more on like speaking in tongues and all this like very charismatic movement. I think it's called like very like dramatic histrionic like performances that are very I think too like a lot of it I was drawing a little bit from Marjo Gordner's documentary. It's called Marjo and it's one of my I watched it a while ago when I was like a teenager, like maybe 15 or so, and I was like that was probably one of the first times I was like kind of like questioning like a bit what was going on in Christianity. I was like probably I would have considered myself pretty strong Christian at that point in my teens, like kind of like, and to kind of sacrosanct myself from all this like sundry different kind of temptations and all these things I was feeling. I was just like really scared, I guess. So I was like, but when I saw that documentary, it was like revealing all the mass hypocrisy with the charismatic movement and how much racketeering and how much fraud there is, and like how much people openly do it too, like on camera. Like they got the camera crew to kind of document the whole thing, and they had basically like one of the guys was like counting the money, and he was like, "Oh yeah, man, God is good." He was just like singing. But yeah, it's like they're so blatantly open about like the stuff that they're fraud, and basically March Corner. The thing is like to make a long short story, he basically was a born in the late 40s, and like when he was a kid, his preacher parents, is crazy, super like far gone, like charismatic, like hardcore Christian. I don't know if they were Baptists or not, but they were definitely like abused. Did things they didn't, but they never. The thing is, they never put a scar on the young Martin Gordner because he was he had to preach the next day because they forced him to like be like, there's your child preacher. He's a child preacher that was ordained by God at 5 years old, and he came to town to give a devil a black eye or something. He was like basically talking like and basically all the old ladies loved him too. They'd be like, oh, how cute, which kind of shows like how like a whole spectacle of all of Pentecostal kind of, yeah, that's a word too. But yeah, he's they forced him to preach and like to construct these sermons, and they wrote the sermons for him to make it seem as if he was like having dreams and visions by God, and it turned out it was all just his parents like writing stuff into his head and being like, you must do like hell is a place, and he was going off in hell, basically fear mongering, a demagoguery up, and yeah, it's like the whole thing was just a mess, and he ended up being like really, luckily somehow he didn't like end up going like crazy from that, but I guess he was able to kind of move on from that and be like, okay, well, I'm not in this crap anymore. I'm just like not in this movement, not into being thrown and inculcated against my will into this movement. So he ended up. So I was kind of getting at that a little bit, like this idea of like the racketeering, more fraudulent people that were more so focused on just making things like interesting and things like happen and loud and brash and dramatic, but at the core there's no substance or any spiritual anything to it, especially when you contrast it with like kind of the very meager minimalist Christian aesthetics, or the Sufi monks or whatever that would fast for days and days and get glean visions of God and stuff, and it was totally different because such a far cry, because this kind of weird Pentecostal kind of thing is more about, they're just like, God wants you to have a good life, he wants you to have money, he wants us to have money, he wants everybody, and it's just not like true at all. It's like not sustainable, it's not true. There's like Darren Brown did a really great job on exposing certain well, they were kind of already exposed, but certain like charismatic frauds like Peter Popoff and like all these other people with the earpieces and saying like God has told me that this that so and so on so and so street, because his wife would basically feed him the information of like the bitches like on the prayer card that the people filled out. So it's like the writings on the wall basically. So but yeah, he basically Darren Brown like made this here I go off again on another movie that you guys need to watch, documentary rather. But he basically would talk about like how easy or not easy, but like how you could very well create this kind of character, this charismatic person, leader to put forth that he did, and like you can kind of mix him in with all the other kind of evangelical kind of crazies, and like you can get then people would buy it up, but at the end they were like, yeah, just, but it was. I liked how it was like in good faith though that they did that, because it was like, basically at the end he was like, yeah, a lot of these preachers, they tell you like for old women to get off their medicine and to not go to the hospital and that God will be, they'll heal you and stuff, but like it's all like, like that's not healthy or right, ethical at all. So yeah, I think I was going for a bit of that. So maybe there is a bit of bile in it, but yeah, Ewell is definitely something of a nihilist, but he's like not. He does these things where he like tries his best to like create something. Like he tries his best to like bleed himself dry, almost like a self-sadomastic thing. He does these things where he's like fast for days and days and days, but then he'll also go on a drinking binge and also engage in like random sex or whatever, and then that will be kind of like this kind of, he preaches this Nietzschean weird kind of recurrence of events, and he's like time, like he's actually quite, even though he's quite uneducated and rough around the edges, obviously he's also quite erudite about certain things, and he'll like I think I wrote one part, not sure if I'll keep it, but one part where he talks about kind of Einstein's theory of relativity in like kind of layman terms, and he's talking about this idea of time, like being relative to the objects in space and time as, like are linked to one another and form one another, in the fact that like there's like somebody watching from a tower will see a car passing by and see it seem it's so, and how very slow it must seem moving, just because of the time and the expanse and the anchorage point, you have the triangulation, I guess, is my lack of mathematics showing on display. But yeah, like that anchorage point, like the point you're seeing time, or the fact that you're seeing something from a far distance seems like it's great, takes such a great amount of time to slowly approach you. And the reason is because it's the closer, it's all relativity. So it's like, I think like on the train Einstein was talking about, in the beginner video that I watched of just the idea of that on the train, or the idea that, I think it's called centripetal force, I guess, when you're like, which obviously that was more of Newton's, I think, theories of, law of thermodynamics and all that, but certain things like gravity and how gravity interacts and this thing, and how you can spin something around in a car, like, a spinning top in a car, while it's in, like, the car is moving, because it's like independent of each other, and it's like, space-time is all like, very, I think he's like kind of has like a weird grasp on that somehow, but that's beside the point. I think I was just trying to point out that he's a bit of a savant in that sense. I mean, he's not autistic, I don't think. He might show some signs of Asperger's maybe, or antisocial personality, definitely. But yeah, he ends up having 12 followers at first, but they all whittle down to like one, and then maybe it's just him at the end. I think the 1 and 2, he surrounds himself with freaks too, like circus freaks, and he's like finds people that are willing, and they're at the dregs of society, and they're kind of the freaks of society that people throw to society. He's like, I want to be surrounded by them, and this is one way that Jesus surrounds himself with taxpayers and sinners, and drinks with them too. And he's like befriends a man by the name of Wayne, who's a giant, kind of 6'10", almost 7 foot tall guy, And then there's another really short guy named Merrill who's like maybe 4 foot something or maybe even shorter. And they're both, circus acts. And he's like, he's like basically hates the circus. And he's like, but he ends up kind of launching his first assault on like a. But yeah, Ewell tries to engage with any and every kind of last drip of stimulation, whether it's an intellectual, more kind of contemplative one, after being in isolation for so long and fasting and having gleaning all these kind of visions of a kind of a quietistic kind of answers of the universe being thrown to him, or whether it's a very or whether it's a long conversation, like being around people too, like kind of teaching his fellow kind of men, everyone around him, and being like, this is, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do this, like don't, and then, or whether it's him, like I said, like getting into fights and doing this stuff to kind of like basically feel, what it's like to, to envelop into, partake in it all, like every shade of everything, not just like starkly good and evil, but in a Gnostic, kind of sense of the term, like absolutes of good and evil are like very limiting, I think, to Ewell. So I'm like him. I'm trying to remove my own opinion from this, but it's just like, this is why I like writing these characters, because like it gives me a chance to kind of see these things play out in my head. So I'm like, okay, well, that helps me understand this, maybe, I guess. Because I don't know, too. I don't know the answers either. But Ewell is, he's like, if this happened, it's like kind of magic realistic, and sometimes, because sometimes it seems like when he totally puts himself into something, he's able to make, for example, he's able to strike a rock in the desert, the Death Valley, I think, in California / Nevada, which I actually went to last year. It was pretty cool for a wedding. Anyway, it was cool to see the Hudson River, not the Hudson River, Hoover Dam. Yeah, you can tell I'm getting really tired. But the show must go on. Hoover Dam was really interesting because there was so much, to see the sheer breadth of it, and the fact that you could actually also have your, one point you could actually see like the time zones in like Nevada, Utah, California, I think too. But anyway, so going back to this, Ewell's trying to make his way from Louisiana and makes his kind of a quest, his ministry, I guess you would say, teaching people, and like, but at the same time he's also like, don't follow me, just do yourself, be who you are, in a Nietzschean sense, like, don't follow me. And then when people follow him, he's like, listen, Christ had 12 followers, but like I can do what Christ needed 10, or like, I'm sorry, I'm going to do with 0 followers what Christ needed 12 for. So that's one of his precepts, I guess, is like he doesn't, he finds that he no longer needs anything, and he's kind of more hermetic and a loner now. But there's phases of life. He's like, then I ate from this thing and I did this and I enjoyed myself with people. I was among people and I just, I ate, and enjoyed myself. But I also then the next day I did this and was like, I abstained from that, and I went into the desert and almost died of starvation and thirst. And there's a time where he's like, gets magically realistic when certain things point out to him, like a snake he'll see in the desert, like talking to him. I think that I'm gonna have to extrapolate on, but yeah, there's so much I want to do with it. That's why I'm hesitant to kind of put it out there yet. But yeah, there's so much that I want to do with it. The Gospel according to Ewell, I wanted to end with his crucifixion. Spoiler alert. He basically self-inflicted too. Like there's things where he's like creates in his own fate. Like he wants himself to be crucified. Again, self-sadistic or sadomasochistic much, but I didn't want to do it in a glamorous way. I wanted to do it like in a truly like horrendous way, and that's why it's pretty hard to write. But yeah, there's a part where he's like, he pushes people to act in such a way. He's like, like he has a Last Supper, and he has the Last Supper with people, and he says, "Do this in forgetfulness of me." Like, forget about me. Don't pay any mind or homage to me. And Yule wants so much to be a ghost too. And it's weird because I'm trying to find that, because there's a contradiction in the fact he's like enjoying himself among people, but there's moments when he denies himself and he's like, you know what, like, don't, like throw me to the wolves or whatever. And he's like, it's just like trying to figure out that balance, if there is any, but maybe there isn't. But yeah, Yule, he has a affinity for Christ. He's like obsessed with Christ imagery, even though he says he's not. In a similar way to like Hazel Motes is about religion. He's like, I start the religion, of kind of without Christ, or like not, but at the same time he can't help but involve Christ with everything he does. Like, he mentions him, he lives his life and his ministry very much in the same way, kind of with the 12 disciples, of surrounding himself among outcasts and fringe dwellers of society, and the freaks and misfits, and he's like, but at the same time there's moments where he will take things a little bit too seriously, and then somebody, like a moment when I wrote down, I think, where all of them are like Wayne and Merrill and the rest of his disciples are in the back seat of a car, and they're driving, and they're like, they oscillate between driving and like, sometimes it's like driving and we have good conversations, and then other times it's like when the car breaks down they just resort to walking. He's like, you know what, I'm fine with walking. And he's like, he's basically, I think Yule is like setting himself up to the pinnacle worst state of anything. Like, he's like, you know what, I'm actually stoically prepared for all of these given scenarios. So like, if you crucify me today, do it. Don't let this cup pass from me. I think like he drinks liquor instead of wine during the Last Supper. Yeah, he's they all and then he points out, he's like, you tomorrow, you will be among the people on the it's just a little bit funny, but he's like, you in the table there, like right across from me, you say you're a Christian. He's eating with Christians now, but he's like, obviously, not really agreeing with them at all, but he's like, he's showing kind of like solidarity with them for once, and he's like, tomorrow I will be at the crack of dawn, I will be crucified or whatever. That's when it all starts to go downhill for me. And he's like, they're all like, we wouldn't do that. We'll protect you. None of us would do that. And he's like, I say before you, like, you will betray me tomorrow. And like, he points to one of the Christians, and he's like, and he's right, like, tomorrow, he's like, I would never do that. But like the next day, like, he gets the exact same Christian person who's like, I would be so loving towards you, like, ends up like stabbing him with like a prick. He's like, kill the Antichrist. And yeah, not really sure to end it. And so why I say, kind of with hesitance, that it's like a collaborative novel, because it would be so nice to put this out there and be like, hey, instead of having to put like editing and have to pay thousands, like literally one of the editing I got a rough assessment for was for about $20,000 because my novel is it's nearing about 1.2 million words, which is excessive, obviously. It takes about 84 hours to read, I think, on Wattpad. But again, I'm not sure like what exactly I want to do. Like, I could put it out, I could let it kind of foment and kind of marinate for you all and see what happens. Like, in a weird way, like, I don't know exactly how to make it collaborative, because is it a thing you could write a spin-off, you could write, or you could, I like the idea of it being collaborative and not being a kind of very limiting kind of single-minded thing, although maybe that's where it kind of benefits the most from, is my ability to kind of amorphous and kind of change it to my liking. But we'll see. I think, yeah, I'm just not too sure what exactly I want to do with it. There's a Zigisty and like Splinter part. It gets kind of more postmodern, post kind of meta, where it's basically Gerald Zigisty is more of a
something.